Hello again, and welcome once again to another episode of the Terry McGriff Show. Just lucky and happy to be alive in this COVID pandemic. Here along with my awesome co-host Andre L. Sullivan, sitting in those beautiful iHeartRadio studios. How you doing, Andre?
I'm good, man. I'm hungry. Somebody feel like bringing lunch to Andre. I promise I love you forever.
Go ahead and bring him some food, man. Man, it's just been a crazy week so far starting out. We got some big news that broke today. We all knew it was coming. We just didn't know exactly when. Guess the NFL is going to expand their season. And we're going to build our show basically around stuff, those type of topics. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about some of these pre-draft trades that happened over the weekend. Also, we're going to discuss our top 5 GMs out there. See who we think is doing a great job in the league. And then we're going to just talk about something that happened here locally that a lot of people have been talking about around the social media circuits about Tyson Alu Alu. It's going to be pretty interesting to see what people think about him. Man, but the big news is the NFL is expanding to 17 games. Now, basically, in my opinion, they didn't really change much. They just made one game count and went to 3 preseason games. So we're going to discuss this on what's the impact of this. It's going to be a big impact. You already got some people, even though they already voted in collective bargaining, you got some people belly aching over it. And I think the teams will be able to manage this, but it's going to be interesting to see, far as the teams, how they manage it. But far as the fans, I think the fans are going to love it, having that extra regular season game to do their fantasy football and everything else that they do, their normal tailgating and things. But what do you think about all that?
It's interesting. I think actually we're going to get a point where the players love this more than fans. The short-term effect of this is that, of course, we get more football. Obviously, with 17 games that actually count, it just gives you more football. Stadiums are going to love this because, obviously, more revenue per year, vice versa, AFC, NFC. The people who are going to hate this is those bubble guys who are trying to get into the league. That 4th preseason game is where we saw a lot of players just make their dreams come true. And this year, you won't get to see that. So if you don't shine early in camp, or those practices that everyone's not privy to see, you may or may not be on a team. You might just make the practice squad. But overall, it just equals more football for those who love the sport. And that's the goal, I believe, of the players' union as well as the owners, and with this CBA agreement and this final decision.
Yeah, in a way, I agree. In some things, I disagree. I think this collective bargaining agreement was more for the middle-of-the-road journeyman player. This collective bargaining agreement really helped them, and I think those guys really spoke up because, a lot of the things helped them out because the big-time players are going to get their money. They're going to get their things that they want, and so it doesn't really matter to them. This one was about the journeyman guys, and they're getting things that'll help them and better their careers. One of the things I think, because we had COVID last year and people didn't have an off season, they really didn't have much of an off season, and there didn't have any preseason games. I think the training camp practices were huge, and how you did in practice gave more emphasis than it did in the games, which in a way I think helps the journeyman guys and the younger guys because they don't have the pressure of playing in front of all those people and making those plays in front of a crowd. And so they're relaxed more because it's a normal practice setting and they can just do their thing. Sometimes people under that light don't play as good. You know, you got some guys that practice good. To give you an example, Blaine Gabbert was excellent practice player. An excellent practice. Got in the lights though, he didn't do so well. But I've seen some practice where people were talking about, man, this guy could be a Hall of Famer. The way he putting the ball ain't hit the ground all practice. He putting the guys on guys, and the guys just loving him. And then get in the game, the pressure comes. You got a different jersey on. He didn't do so well. So some of these guys, you know, really can thrive in that area. So that's why I'm having a little bit of disagreement. Also, give you an example, we had preseason games with James Robinson won that job here in Jacksonville under those lights. Not that he wouldn't have been able to perform, but it might have changed the circumstances. So I think actually having that one less preseason game will put, like last year, put more emphasis on the practices and what those guys do in practice. And having that less game, well, you know, those guys are not going to play as many games anyways. They're going to figure out a way to make the second game your second and third game type thing. So they'll figure out a way to make that with those preseason games to, you know, count for those guys, because they're going to sit those guys mostly since they only got 3 preseason games anyway. I guarantee you the first game might have more emphasis than it did before. Usually the first preseason game was, hey, we're going to say hello to the crowd, and then they get them in for a play or two and they're out. I think the first preseason game will probably be more like your first preseason game will be like your more traditional second preseason game. Coming out of the box, probably let those guys get more into it right out of the box. But we'll see. I mean, some people are going to do it differently, but I think that's what it's going to be. They just moved everything up a game. The real impact on me, I was listening to what's going on, is this international games. You're going to have more countries getting international games, and you're going to have more teams that's going to have to do it. Plus the flip-flopping of having the extra games every year, the extra home games. So now you'll have that extra home game that you normally didn't have. So I think that's going to be really, really good, especially to a team like the Jaguars, who can use that revenue. They'll probably turn it into a second game in London or another overseas trip, which helps them with their revenue. So they'll be able to do that every year. I know before this COVID thing, they were talking about playing 2 games in London anyway, so they might make that a tradition where they play that two games over there now instead of one, at least every other year when they have that extra revenue of the extra home game. So it's going to be interesting to see that. Also, I think you know, guys get that extra week of paycheck. They won't have to necessarily stretch it in, put it in the 16 games of 17 weeks. They'll have but I guess they're going to have that 1 bye week instead of 2 bye weeks, so it might just actually stay the same now that I think about it. So I'm looking forward to seeing the impact on that. Now, as far as the fans, I think how are you going to everything's going to probably be adjusted now because of you know, with fantasy football being such a big thing. You know, you only had that one 16 game, you know, 17 weeks. So now, unless they adjust it again, I'm not sure exactly, but they might change things, how they do with things with fantasy football. I know everything will be moved up now. I think the first game now is scheduled to be September 9th, since we don't have the extra preseason game. It's going to be fun. More importantly for the fans. Now, you was talking about for the players, it's going to be, they're going to like it more. I'm not sure, because there was a little bit of year. I think when I was younger, there was a big adjustment. I remember they went from 14 to 16 games back in 1978, and it took about a year or two for people to kind of adjust to that. So it's going to be interesting. I really think it's going to be interesting. I think one of the things is going to be being more global, having all these different games playing in other countries now. What do you think about the globalization of these games, though?
I absolutely hate it. I think it's an absolute waste of time on the NFL. Mm-hmm. And I think it's a very, very money-hungry thing that they're trying to do. Mm-hmm. Get this game as a global game. It's. I don't think we as Americans understand that. You know, somewhere in the middle of nowhere, Kansas, right mm-hmm. now, it's 4:43 our time here in Jacksonville, Florida. But mm-hmm. somewhere in the middle of nowhere, Kansas, they're playing a football game in the streets. That's cool. That's what mm-hmm. they do. That's what we Americans do. Mm-hmm. Somewhere in the middle of nowhere, Peru, they're kicking a soccer ball. Mm-hmm. They're going to kick that soccer ball They're never going to touch that soccer ball unless someone's trying to get it in a net. And we as Americans, we have this very Romanistic, old-style British mentality where we can force our opinion on the rest of the world. Football is just not that sport that's going to do it. It's going to always be the fun thing that the rest of the world says the Americans do, and that's what it's going to be. And if you're ever in a room listening to the players genuinely, not when TV cameras are around, but genuinely express their feelings about international games, they hate them. They absolutely hate them. It's away. They're away from their families already as athletes, and then we're dragging them across the world. There are times where teams don't decide to leave before 2 days before the game, which means if they're going to play in England, that's a 14-hour flight, and now they have to stay up to adjust to the time over there in England and wherever, and then they're playing a game in a different atmosphere. And it's one of those things where players, it was a really, real cool experience, but if I never do it again, I'm okay with it. and so, it's cool for the NFL. Again, it's more revenue. Obviously, you're again forcing your sport down the rest of the world's throat. But if I never see another international game, or if I never have to wake up at 9 a.m. to cover another international game, I'm okay with it.
Okay. Now, I know you're talking about like in Europe and in Europe, obviously, which is England's in Europe. Asia, I'm pretty sure that's a pretty hard haul. But here where you got the South America, Mexico, I think that might be more accepted in Mexico. Probably the one place that did, because obviously if you put the Cowboys and the Raiders down there, they're always going to probably fill that place. I think it's kind of rude to try to force our games into Canada because they have their own league and they play football an American now style, but even though they use Canadian rules. I think it's just, like you said, I think it's more marketing than anything. I don't know if it's ever going to take root where you're going to have a lot of players and people going to do that, because we're always going to be down the list in the rest of the world, because football, as we call it, we call it soccer, and cricket and other sports take more precedence. Even baseball is still more popular than American football in a lot of these countries. Besides the fact of how expensive it is to put teams on, let alone a game, to outfit teams and all the equipment and all the stuff, and how much time and how many people it takes. So you're right. It's going to be a little bit of a long time to get that to sell. They had the European League for a while that the NFL had, and obviously that go for a reason. So I do agree with you there that it's going to be hard to get that where it's going to be a normal thing there. But I think the fact that they are getting games in England and they're selling them out, I think that's going to be a pretty popular, because it's more like a bowl game event more than just part of a league thing. I think that's where that's going to see that. It's just an additional revenue source that they use. And for the players, it's actually kind of like going back to college, playing like a bowl game, because it gives you a bowl game week of distractions, join all the travel and all the other stuff, and then all the PR stuff that you might have to do, just because it's like you're doing a Super Bowl event in the middle of the regular season. So I kind of agree with you that, and we'll see how long this lasts, but I guess as long as the NFL sees it making the money, they'll continue to do it. Well, so let's speaking of that, we're gonna go into this. The GM's gonna have some things on their hand. We got the draft coming up. We're still in the middle of free agency. I want to talk about the people who make the decisions for the most part on these teams. We're gonna sit here and we're gonna talk about what we think are the top 5 general managers in the NFL. These guys, tend to make or break a team, far as what they do, when they bring in players, especially drafting. You say you build a team through the draft, you can fill your needs with free agencies, but who are the top 5 guys? And, there's obviously some teams out there, people have made their list. I want to know who you got as your top 5, and then I'll tell you who my top 5 are.
Well, first off, for everyone who's at home watching, and we discussed this a little earlier, a GM, controls player transactions and primary responsibility on half of the team during contract discussions.
Mm-hmm.
I think people don't really understand that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, more GMs have more power than others. You know, depending on what your first and last name is, but
Go back to check.
yeah, you know what I mean. But yeah, that's the basic responsibility of a GM. So starting off at number one for me, a lot of people really overlook him. I'm surprised that they do, but it has to be Brett Veach in Kansas City. The job that he has done assembling that team deserves GM of the year almost every year until he has to let a bunch of them go. It was said a long time ago, it costs to win in the NFL.
Mm-hmm.
It absolutely does. And
Mm-hmm.
to have those players on this roster for at least going on 3 to 4 years now
Mm-hmm.
is amazing to me. And I don't understand how he does it. If someone came up one day and was like, Brett Veach has been doing some under the table dealing, I'd be like, I knew it. I knew it. But no one said anything yet. So I just gotta tip my hat to him because of the job he does.
Mm-hmm.
And number two, a lot of people are gonna disagree with me when I say this, but John Snyder in Seattle has done a tremendous job. And here's why I say John Snyder. Since he's gotten the job in Seattle, he's found ways to continuously put together a somewhat winning team.
Mm-hmm.
He's been to the playoff. As a GM, he's never missed the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think people really get that with him, but the job that he's done, and Pete Carroll's the face of that franchise. Russell Wilson being the player face of that franchise, but the job that John Snyder has done over there in Seattle is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And right behind him, number 3 for me is Kevin Colbert.
That's interesting.
Kevin Colbert, the job Pittsburgh. When has Mike Tomlin had a losing season?
He hadn't really had a bad season. I think he had one last year, 19.
Yeah, and they went to the playoffs. But that's my point. You know what I mean?
Now, did they miss the playoffs in 2020?
No.
Okay.
But that's my point. They got kicked out early. That's why you don't hear it.
Okay.
But my point is Kevin Colbert up there in that front office, literally pieces by piece. He keeps that one steady piece, named Ben Roethlisberger.
Mm-hmm.
And piece by piece.
Okay.
Just puts it together, and I don't get it. I'm jealous. I'm jealous. I really am, just because of just how well he's been able to do it. And he's just one of those people that I tip my hat to, because overall I just don't get it. He's like I said with Brett Veach, I don't get how they just continuously just retool. Mm-hmm. They never have to rebuild. They just refuel and retool every year, and that's him. My last but not least, certainly not least, and God forgive me if I mispronounce his name, it is Brian Gutekunst.
I think I know you're talking about.
Oh, I said that wrong. He's the general manager for the Green Bay Packers.
Yes.
And the reason why a lot of people don't know is that the Green Bay Packers is a publicly owned franchise, which means that you can be a random citizen, put $5 in the hat, and you're a part of the ownership team for the Green Bay Packers, which means you answer to a board. A lot of teams don't have that. A lot of teams answer to a manager, an owner, if you will. And Brian, on a regular basis, does the same thing that Kevin Colbert does up there in Pittsburgh. Some way or another, they struggle up in the front of the schedule, but come down by toward the end of the year, the Green Bay Packers are in the mix. And they're in the playoffs, and they're deep in the playoffs, and now they're in the NFC Championship, and so you have those guys constantly keep their teams in the mix, and I think as long as you're in the dance, you always got a chance to win, and because you can never win it when you're sitting at home, and so those are my 5 guys, man.
Okay, you almost got it similar, but I'm maybe having a little bit bigger range, and I'll tell you why. My thing with me with Grims is longevity of what they've done. How can they manage somewhat lean times or some transitional times? And so I'm going to start with my list going top to bottom, number 5 all the way to number 1. And we're going to go with who you thought really, really high of. I'm going to go with the Kansas City's general manager, Brett Veach. Number 5 is the reason I'm saying that because he's done it very lately, and it's quickly since he's been over. He obviously with the hiring of Andy Reid as the head coach, and then bringing guys in and stuff like that, and they've just risen. So give me see what he does in the next 5 to 10 years, and I'm pretty sure as long as they got that nucleus together, they're going to be good. So if you look at that, you can project that like some of the teams as you see as I go late in the list. So Brett Veach is good. I mean, for him to see and project what he wanted to see with all of those with Andy Reid and what he was going to do, and then they went and got the quarterback, and then they made their team into basically a track team and changed the way people do offense now a little bit. And even with that, they're still kind of balanced. And when able to how he's done with his salary cap lately, to be able to keep those guys there, that was good. Even though they just lost, I forgot one of the receivers. He just went over to the Ravens. Yeah. So he would be number 5. Number 4 would be Eric DeCosta, because I'm going to give him, because filling the shoes of the great Ozzie Newsome is not an easy thing to do. And sometimes people can get the ball and they drop the ball and they don't maintain that. And I think he's done a pretty good job of maintaining and keeping that team relevant in the playoff contender and stuff like that. So he's kind of taking what was built and not necessarily improved it, because they haven't been to a Super Bowl yet, but he hasn't got them where they're drafting in the top 5 again. So, you give a little credit where credit to do. So he's and he was an understudy. So I give him that. So I'll give him that at that 4 mark. Number 3 is Mickey Loomis, Saints with the Saints. We started, in my opinion, with what they brought in, the coaching staff. Then they got Drew Brees. And they've been through several different variations of that offense and that defense, bringing in different players. I mean, you go think about from back in 2008, 2009 season, they've always been relevant. People have always been picking them as a Super Bowl contender. And obviously all of these crazy losses that they had in the playoffs from different styles have probably kept them out of the Super Bowl. But, that city was terrible for decades. From being the Aints to now, you haven't even heard nobody say that name. That most of these kids right now don't even know that they used to wear paper bags over their heads, those fans. So you got to give him some credit in that whole organization for being relevant for this amount of time now. I hate to do this, but give John Robinson and the Titans some credit. They've kind of reinvented themselves with their coaching staff, and they've always seemed to stay relevant, even though they've never been great. And the fact that they got to the AFC Championship game a couple of years ago, they've not been bounced out of the playoffs yet. They've been able to find the right quarterback for the right time to be able to make the plays. And think about it, just even since 2017, they've still been able to do. Even before that, they've still been able to stay relevant. So. John Robinson, even though he's a Titan, hey, got to give credit where credit is due. Where am I? Number 2 now? 2, I got to give it to Kevin Colbert with the Steelers. I mean, you can say enough said because they're the Steelers. They've always been relevant, and you explained their situation and what they've done. How many head coaches have they had in their history? You can put them all in one hand. You know what I mean? So they've been able to manage, and I think they do a great job at finding the next guy. They always seem to find the guy, get rid of a guy before it's time, before a year too early than a year too late. And this year they've actually kind of flipped it. They brought guys back that they normally would say, okay, let's go. But those guys said, you know what? I've seen the history of these guys y'all let go. They may not be any good going anywhere else. We're going to stay. And we'll talk about what happened with that situation at the end of the show on that. That kind of brings us into that. But number one is and he's the GOAT right now because, even though they didn't make the playoffs last year, and he said he double as the head coach and the GM, you got to give Belichick his due. With you name the player from since 2000, they went, how many quarterbacks that he's done? They went, I think 11-5 one year when they didn't make the playoffs when Brady got hurt. But they've been able to stay not just relevant, but stay a Super Bowl contender for the better part of 18 to 20 years. How many Super Bowls has this man been participated in? To reinvent himself, even with this year, to go out and be able to get these free agents to come in, to bring back old players that left to come and go get some more money and say, you know what, I'm going to go back, for whatever reason. Some guys got the Van Noy, I think, got released. But the first place he thought, let me go back home. There's even talking about going and getting San Francisco's quarterback, in the trade, they'd be able to bring him back home, BG. There's a rumor about that floating out there. I don't know if that's going to happen, but to get Cam Newton and to get Cam Newton cheap, even though they had some leverage, but the way the Cam Newtons actually wanted to come back, and guys want to come there. I think they've done a great job. I think he's been the standard bearer for how to put a team in it. Even not having some of the greatest drafts, he had some hit and misses on his draft. I think you still got to say, for what he does, being the head coach and the GM, he's the number one guy out there. So I know that's my top five. You got anything that you want to say on that? You think that?
Nah, man, I'm good. It hurts my feelings. You named Titan, but
I know I didn't want to do it, but to be credible, you have to give credit where credit is due. I mean, I don't like to give Titans. I remember back in the day, Freddie T used to say, hey, we still better than the Titans. I'm like, no, bro. At the end of the day, if they keep winning the game, they even came out with a song. I'm in one local radio station. Freddie T, the Jags aren't better than Tennessee. It is what it is. And until somebody shows different, they got the Jaguars number. And their GM has been able to put things together. Who, from what he did from the Marco Murray, brought him in for a year to get the diesel ready. That's what I call him, the diesel. Derrick Henry. I mean, who saw that? Who saw him setting that up? And then going from Mariota to getting Lord, I forget his name, out of Miami, Tannehill, and they've still been able to just get back into the playoffs. I mean, look at it. Think about it. You remember that great run with Mariota, and they thought he was making that turn when he had that great playoff game where he actually caught the ball from himself and went in and scored on it. They thought that they had the guy, and then he had it down, and they had the foresight to already have Tannehill on hand to get him in there, to have that guy to take over, and now they moved the franchise forward. So you got to get them having some vision and foresight. And they letting some guys go that you didn't think they're going to have let go, like Jarrell Kersey, and they still haven't missed a beat too much on defensive side. So, credit where credit is due, man. So I hate to say the Titans got a good job with their scouting department and their GM, but it is what it is. And they drafted pretty well. Look at the receivers and stuff, the players that they brought in lately. So, all right. Speaking of that, we talked about the Steelers. Let's talk about something when it's come with the Steelers. Mr. Tyson Alu Alu signed. Well, let's say he didn't sign. He agreed in principle with the Jacksonville Jaguars about roughly 10, 11 days ago. People were kind of excited that he was going to come home. To me, it was like, okay, I understand what they're doing. They're going to a 3-4. He's a good guy. I knew he could play nose guard, and he was going to play the 3-4 defensive end. So I thought he was a good rotational player that'll get depth out of him. I didn't realize how great of a season he had last year, and that he was going to, be brought in to just play nose guard, but that was okay. Until they got the news that they brought in Malcolm Brown. And I think a lot of that had made some ripples with Tyson Alu, in my opinion, to say, you got a younger version of me that they brought in and made trades, so I don't think I'm going to start. Plus, I just built the dream home in Pittsburgh, and I had my best season there. I think I'm going to stay. That ruffled a lot of feathers and rubbed the people a lot of wrong way, knowing that he was an original player here and he was drafted here. They thought that he probably had owed the Jaguars some type of loyalty. This is the NFL. This is free agency. Nothing is set in stone until that ink is dry. And, fans got to kind of learn that it is what it is. But I'm trying to still feel like what I feel on this guy, but I really don't blame him right now if he thinks that he's not going to be a starter and he thinks his career is going to continue to prosper in Pittsburgh. So I kind of have a hard time being angry with the guy, but I can understand how the fans feel also.
I'm torn on it, to be honest with you.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a guy, for everything you said, drafted by the Jacksonville Jaguars. Again, agreed in principle, like you noted, to rejoin the Jacksonville Jaguars. There's a small tidbit you missed on there.
Okay.
So what happens is, when you agree in principle, no, you don't put ink to paper yet. You basically, your agent sat with the general manager and the controller's office of the Jacksonville Jaguars and said, this is what our guy wants. This is what we're going to pay him. We agree on that. Boom. The problem with that is that once you agree in principle, regardless of ink to paper, that is a verbal contract. And once that gets taken into consideration, the club that you have made that verbal contract with, or since we're using terms, agreed in principle with,
mm-hmm.
they're free to begin marketing. I need people, our national, and more importantly, our national fans to understand that the NFL in the country is this big. When it comes to sports in Jacksonville, it's this big. And when you
small market, I get it.
When you do stuff like that to a market, now the fan base is torn on it, because when Tyson Alu Alu did not have his greatest years playing at TIAA Bank Field, and so a lot of fans remember that. But the smarter fan, for lack of a better term, has seen his time in Pittsburgh, and they understand what he could have brought back to the bank. Me personally, never wanted to see Tyson Alu Alu in a Jacksonville Jaguar jersey again. I just don't trust him as a nose tackle. And granted, he's had some good years up there in Pittsburgh, but you got to also, we talked about this last week, certain puzzles fit in certain places.
Mm-hmm.
I'm okay with him not coming here. Mm-hmm. And when you look at what he had surrounding him in Pittsburgh, if I got somebody whose last name is Watt coming off of the edge, I'm gonna have some one-on-ones too. It just comes with territory, and Josh Allen hasn't gotten there yet. DeJuan Smoot hasn't gotten there yet. Tyson has not gotten there yet. And not saying that they can't emerge as those types of players, but he's, Alu Alu, once again, was a better puzzle piece for what they put together in Pittsburgh. And, so kudos to him. Hopefully, it works out in his favor. If it doesn't, as a media person that works in Jacksonville, Florida, I get to sit and laugh and talk about it.
Now, just to piggyback what you're saying now, the smart fans who know and people who kind of watch the game and know, if you're a little old fart like myself, as we call it, I remember him in college. And in college at Cal, he was a 3/4 end and no tackle. he was dominant. That's what we reached for to make him the 10th pick, because they saw him doing that in the 3-4 defense and projected him as a 3 technique defensive tackle because of that. And I'm like, why would you do the same mistake this time? Didn't you watch the history? Did you see what the Jaguars did with this young man called Bryce Pop? You took a pass rusher and then put him in coverage. Now you're going to take a 3-4 defensive end nose guard and put him at the 3 technique when he's a 2-gap guy, and make him a 1-gap guy and thinking that that's going to work. And it didn't work. So I was kind of excited that he could go and show what the defense that he should have been, and he flourished in it in Pittsburgh, and we're going to transition it to him because Joe Cullen had wanted him just specifically for that reason. And we won't get to see him flourish here in that, just so that it would kind of be like a redeeming value, that it wasn't a total bust on the pick. It was that he shouldn't have been picked that high, secondly, and they put him in the wrong defense. And also to go elaborate what you said about Josh Allen and all those young guys, they are, in my opinion, going to flourish in this 3-4 defense because that's what they played in college too. Most people don't understand. They played some of that at Kentucky and at LSU. He was a 3-4 outside linebacker, defensive rush outside linebacker. He didn't have his hand on the ground. He stood up in a 2-point stand where he can see over the top of the tackle and make his moves. They're going to be finally put by people, competent coaches, who will not try to fit a square peg in a round hole, but make these guys play where they're naturally gifted to play at, just like we're asking these quarterbacks to do now. Put them in offenses that they're familiar at and they're comfortable with. How about do the same thing with the defensive players? So this group, that's why I have a little bit of optimism that they're going to do that. The key thing, like I thought about with him, I thought his thing was he wasn't thinking he was going to be the guy at the nose tackle position. But I thought it also coming here would prolong his career to be able to play less snaps and have more versatility playing the nose guard and the defensive end over the offensive tackle would have helped him have more versatility. Probably would end up having more sacks and just instead of playing nose guard where he's going to play in at Pittsburgh. Plus, they don't have Bud Dupree there anymore. So it's going to be interesting how that works out for So sometimes, and I understand family there, they just built the dream home, but when you get that kind of money, you can build another dream home. And there's no state taxes in Florida like there are in the state of Pennsylvania. So I wish him a lot of luck. I mean, I think the fans who knew kind of had their opinions. That's why you have people like on the fence. Some people are a little butt hurt, and some people like, oh, whatever. I think it would have been great, but I think bringing Gotzes back and some of those, and I actually think, I can't remember his name, the first round pick that we got out of Florida actually might flourish in this because he's an extremely strong man, and I think they can put him at either position, and I think he's going to flourish. But I think they actually made the better decision by going and getting Malcolm Brown. I think he's going to do a better job. So I think I looked at this defense. I don't think they really got hurt because they were able to bring guys to replace Tyson that might probably do a better job with less of a price tag. All right, what I wanted to think before we take this show off the air and get ready for next week's show is I want to thank and ask you good folks to first like and subscribe this channel if you like our content. Hit that like button, subscribe, get those notifications so you know when we have the next show. And also, just give our sponsors some love. She-Car, Watch Game Film, the Women's Tackle Football League, Team Sports Redirect, and our good friends over there at Laces Out and with the Dent Project. We had a really good weekend this last weekend. Had a lot of people show up. I'd like to give a special thank you to all my partners, Nick Gatto, Mike Hollis, Todd Covington, obviously, all the family with that, Ashley, Shantae, all you guys, T at the Dent Project, all you guys. I want to just I don't have a time to game all our people who came out there. Bill, you know what you are with that fantastic tea, the launch pad. We had a really good time. The banquet was on that night was just inspiring. Listen to everybody speak, all the different stories, all the different things, why we're doing this for bringing women's football and trying to bring more light to also sex trafficking in this country. Man, it was a great event. I had a good time. Those who missed it, well, we're going to have some stories. We did some interviews, so we'll post that soon. So I wanted to thank everybody, and until next week, on behalf of our great of our great producer who came out there and did a great job that weekend too, Granville Moody Fowler, All Sports High, and my illustrious co-host, Andre L. Sullivan. We'll see you next week. God bless, and thank you for watching the Terry McGriff Show.